Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Powerful Nothing, a Magic the Gathering podcast. As always, I'm joined by my co-host James. How's it going, dude?
Yeah, pretty good, man. Pretty good. Been jamming some Lord of the Rings draft, and of course, millions of Pioneer Leagues in preparation for this episode.
Good, man. Good to hear.
I did one. No time.
Well, fortunately, we've got a little bit of a ringer with us today to help us out in our deep dive into the format of Pioneer. We are joined by Alex. Welcome to the podcast, dude.
Well, thank you for having me. Nice to join you.
Awesome. Yeah. Great to have you here. And I know you've been playing a fair bit of Pioneer, so good to have your insight and just good to have you here in general.
Yeah, I've been playing Pioneer for all the regionals and RCQs and just generally messing around with the format for what feels like forever, but probably about 6 months. So hopefully I am slightly insightful.
No, I'm looking forward to today. It should be good. Cool. So as always, there will be time codes down below if anyone wants to jump around. Our first topic for the day is the news. So let's start off with, I guess, the biggest, probably the most financially impactful bit of news in a fair bit of time. Someone has found the One Ring. It was found in Whitby, Ontario, Canada, and has immediately been graded PSA 9. Pack fresh, I guess, is that's as good as you can get nowadays. So I don't think, at time of recording, the card has been sold. There has been offers for about between $1 or $2 million, which if it goes for that, I think would make it the most expensive card ever. I think up until now, it's Post Malone's $800,000 artist proof of a Black Lotus. So I'm assuming that we're all gutted that we weren't the ones to open the One Ring. How do you guys feel about, I guess, one, it being found, and two, the One Ring in general?
Mostly, I think the upside of it being found is maybe Twitter can stop talking about it quite so much. It seems like, I don't know, I thought the set was really cool, and I kind of found it weird that so much of the discourse was just about the One Ring. I don't really have a strong opinion either way on them printing the card, but it's not like something that really grabs my imagination, to be honest.
I mean, the big impact at the moment is the collector's booster prices have just tanked. So obviously people were buying their collector's boosters, trying to open the One Ring. And I think last time I looked, they were down like £100 or something week on week. It's a bit of a gimmick. In a way, I'm sad that no one's thrown it into a volcano yet. Albeit accepting I probably wouldn't have done it, but I will judge everyone else for not doing it themselves.
Well, I did hear a proposal that you could crowdfund to throw it into a volcano if you hit $1 million.
Yeah, I think we'd all give a tenner for that.
Yeah.
Who's the golem going in after it, though? That's the question.
To be decided, I guess.
Awesome. And then, moving on to our next, that was the kind of main bit of news. It's been a bit quiet, I guess, because we're in the summer. The next big release, and this is coming up way too quickly, is Commander Legends is going to be released at time of recording less than a month away. Spoiler season starts super quickly. There are some new cards in that, so make sure you are subscribed or you follow the podcast because we will be talking about them as they come out. Last bit of news. This is a bit of news for the podcast. I will be at MagicCon Barcelona. If you see me, come say hello. I've already signed up for the Mystery Gavin Verhey event. They did one. They've done these before. They seem really cool. You get kind of 3 packs of the current set, 2 packs of Mystery Booster, and then 1 pack that Gavin has made specifically for that event, which seems pretty fun. And then also a sentence I never thought I would say. After the Saturday, I'm going to an Elijah Wood DJ set, which they're having as the after party. So that seems really weird, but I'm kind of all here for it. If anyone's there, come say hello. It'd be great to see you all out in person.
It is really hard to miss Dan. He is a gigantic human being. If you can't see him, just go get some glasses is my advice.
Look up. Awesome. Well, I think with that, let's move on to our main topic of the day. We're going to be doing a state of the format for Pioneer. So James and Alex have played a fair bit of this format. So I guess the aim for today is to give people kind of all the information they need to kind of jump in and start playing games, kind of like give you a bit of a prep if you want to kind of start playing Pioneer in general, or start taking it a bit more seriously? Because I know a lot of the tournaments are also Pioneer related. So I guess to start, let's give a brief overview of the format. Alex, do you want to tell us a little bit about Pioneer, what it is, and kind of what it does?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first and foremost, Pioneer is all standard legal cards, bar any cards that have been specifically banned from Return to Ravnica onwards. The most prominent bannings really are the Khans of Tarkir fetch lands, which I think most people who play the format would see as a benefit. Nowhere near as much shuffling as Modern, for example. It's very similar to Explorer on Arena. Explorer obviously has been developed to be the Arena equivalent of Pioneer. At the moment, Explorer does miss some notable cards. Examples would probably be Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, other delve spells because it doesn't have the Khans of Tarkir block on it, and, for example, Reckless Bushwhacker. Though there are an amount of decks you can play with substitutes, so if you do play on Arena, then you get your dose of Pioneer. Historically, it's had quite a lot of bans, as you would expect for a new format. In the past year, it's been pretty stable. I think the last bans were about June last year, when Winota and Expressive Iteration were rightfully kicked out of the format.
Yep.
And Lyris just before them, because that one was a surprise. I don't think anyone expects any future bans, so it's nice to have a stable format. In terms of gameplay, I would personally compare it to where Modern was around about 2018. It's diverse, it's pretty balanced. You can just about do everything. In one or two specific areas are maybe a little weaker. I think people would gripe that there's a lack of a genuine combo deck, but you can play aggro decks, mid-range decks, control decks, and there's a wide variety if you go to any tournament. So I think Pioneer's in a really good place right now, and a really good format to pick up if you want to get into competitive constructed Magic.
Awesome, fantastic. And I kind of how well supported is Pioneer? I'm assuming because it's a format that's only been around, as you said, for about 5 years now. Again, pandemic years don't really count, but it's been around for about 4 or 5 years. I'm assuming it's quite heavily supported in terms of like tournaments and like RCQs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so Pioneer had a really rocky start, right? I think the first Pioneer tournaments were what were then Players Tours, which were January 2020. And then this COVID-19 thing came along, and Pioneer hadn't really got any roots. So it kind of, in the pandemic era of Magic, didn't have much support. The bannings during the pandemic were also pretty wild. We went through a phase of no bannings when bannings seemed likely, and then they just basically banned the entire format out. So it's taken a while for Pioneer to get a footing, but obviously with it's got a lot of competitive support in that it's been Pro Tour format. It's been the format now for 2 regional championship seasons and the upcoming season, which will be September-ish for the regional championship. So people have a reason to play it. I think the more people have played it, the better the format's got as well. It's definitely benefited from more eyes and people trying new style of decks.
No, awesome. That makes sense. Yeah. Supported formats tend to grow and do well. And what you were saying about the bans, I do remember when it first came out, like lots of cards were legal, and it was. I mean, when Pioneer started, I really liked the idea because it was just like, we're not going to ban anything apart from the fetch lands, break it, and then we'll work it out. And kind of, it makes sense that we're kind of in a better place after that. Kind of like things have calmed down. People have pushed it as far as they can. And I guess they kind of found that sweet spot. That does sound quite cool.
Yeah, the only issue I think people have had with the bans is when they banned Inverter Cruise, Underworld Breach, Walking Ballista, and Kethis. And part of that was because they deliberately didn't ban Inverter of Truth about a month or two before, when most people who played the format would have said it was reasonably dominant.
Mm-hmm.
And then they banned the best 4 decks out of the format. And that tends to make a format less popular for a while.
No, 100%. So just James, this one's for you, I guess. I know you've played a bit of Standard and also a fair bit of Modern. Is there a pathway for players who kind of is there an easy pathway from standard? Because in theory, kind of Pioneer sits in between standard and modern. Is there kind of a pathway that you can take a deck from standard into Pioneer, and then likewise, is there a path for you to take a deck from Pioneer into modern? Kind of, is that doable? Or?
So from standard, I think you will find it tough if you have a standard collection for just this standard and nothing else, because the vast majority of Pioneer decks are, we're talking about last 10 years of Magic, so it's you're not going to really have that deck super smoothly translate into a really competitive Pioneer deck most of the time. But I mean, you can definitely, I think you could use that base and probably build something tier 4. But if you want to go a bit higher power level than that, if you just have recent standard cards, you're still going to have to put in a decent chunk of money. In terms of if you have been playing standard for the last 5 years, though, then you're going to have a lot of most of the decks, really. But it is worth noticing the price of the format is this very much isn't modern price wise. It's significantly cheaper. You don't have any of the Horizons type sets. They haven't done any of the sort of premium straight to Pioneer sets, which I think is actually a really, really good thing. It means these were all cards that were in standard at some point, therefore the supply is pretty high, so it makes format much more affordable. And it keeps that relevance to standard cards. If you look at sort of the greatest hits of standard in the last 5 years, a lot of them do see play in Pioneer, which I think is quite nice. It feels like it links into to standard Magic in a way that I'd say modern really doesn't anymore. The other thing, I would say I really liked the format for a lot of the time it's existed. I think banning the fetch lands from day one was a really smart move. It feels like you can definitely play a lot of colors in the format, but it feels like you're paying a very real cost there. In a way where if you play Modern or Legacy, you see there's these 4 and 5 color decks, all the lands are untapped. There's a point in Legacy where there are 4 color decks playing Blood Moon. This is just absurd. But this was during the Arkham's Astrolabe era, to be fair. But Pioneer, you do have to play a lot of triomes. You're not just playing one triome to fetch your fetch lands. You're playing maybe 10 tap lands in your deck. It's a very real cost. I think that bounces the format quite nicely. There's a lot of decks where there's there's maybe multiple versions. For example, you have a straight blue-white Spirits deck, or you have a Bant Spirits deck that gets to play Collected Company, but obviously pays some costs for having that extra color. And I think that's quite a nice dynamic. For the mana bases are good but not broken in a way that isn't true in any of the fetch land formats, and it really keeps the price down of the format as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the big draws to Pioneer in a way is its imperfections. You don't have perfect mana for 3 color decks, so that the most prominent decks in Pioneer are 2 color decks. The third color really is a cost. There's decisions in deck building because of where the power level is in the format. If we talk about Rakdos Midrange in a bit, but they have to decide which 2 mana spot removal spell they play, and it can be an instant, but it doesn't hit everything. It can be an instant, but it gains life, or it can be a sorcery. And if you pick the wrong one in the wrong matchup, for example, Power Word Kill doesn't hit dragons. You'll turn up to an RCQ, and every so often somebody will be trying to make a dragons deck work. And if you turn up with 4 Power Word Kills, you're like, I can't kill any of your creatures with this. Well, you look like a bit of a chump, don't you? And I think that's a real. It sounds bad, but to me, it's a real draw to the format. It makes the choices you make in deck building and the choices you make in how to play the game have much bigger options than, like we say in Modern, you can play 4 color decks easily. You can play Terminate as your 2 mana removal and just kill everything and not have to think as much about it.
No, that's cool. That's really interesting. That does sound very appealing. In terms of, so I'm assuming then that the format isn't solved. It's a newish format. There's still a lot of room for is there room for new decks, for new archetypes? Are things still being discovered? From what you've said, there's still kind of your flex slots, you can kind of choose what you want to like kind of tailor it to how you want to play and what you think you're going to play against. But in terms of like, can there be like, is there still room for like new decks and new archetypes to exist out there?
Yeah, I think every new set in Pioneer has an impact. It might be a small impact, but has an impact on the format. And there's a bunch of like cards and archetypes out there that are so close to being competitively viable that like one card will push them to being pretty good. Or you get completely crazy new things. Like an example would be the Attribution Alteration deck, which I think it was CFT SOP turned up with US regionals. And I saw the deck list and I was like, oh, this is cute. This Archfiend with the Dross card, but what's Metamorphic Alteration? This draft rare that you didn't always play your draft deck.
It was an unplayable commander card. That's how I remembered it, if I'm honest with you. And there's like, what is going on?
Yeah, but then someone tells you, oh, we've got a Splinterton situation over here. Twitter spends the next week debating whether it is actually Splinter Twin or a lot worse than Splinter Twin. But yeah, new decks spring up, and I think there's so many decks close to the line of what's viable competitively that every new set is exciting, right? We could talk about a card like Rally the Ancestors, which I think is a busted card, and you're just waiting for like one or two cards to break that deck. And when it does, the first person who shows up to a tournament is going to have so much fun. So yeah, I think there's plenty of room to brew in Pioneer.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. As someone who probably enjoys building decks more than actually playing them, that sounds phenomenal. That sounds really cool. All right, I think that's a good little overview. Should we jump into the decks and kind of we'll go over some of like the main archetypes, some of the main decks that are running around at the moment, kind of break them down for everyone. Alex, do you want to take it away with our first deck of the day? Do you want to tell us about Rakdos Midrange?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'm going to apologise to everyone for describing them as the X of the format based on old modern decks, but it's kind of the easiest way to do it. Rakdos Midrange is very firmly the Jund of the format when Jund was good in modern. It plays individually good cards, it plays interaction, it plays good creatures, it wants to 1-for-1 you out of the game and beat you with whatever threat it's got left standing. Pioneer obviously doesn't have Tarmogoyf, so we lose the green in favour of just being straight red-black. It does what it says on the tin. It's a mid-range deck. It's been, I think, the most played deck at pretty much every regional championship this season. Its results haven't always been incredible, but you kind of wouldn't expect the most played deck to always have the highest win rate. It's reasonably consistent. That's why people like it. It has a lot of agency. It doesn't tend to have very polarizing matchups. It's the classic 45-55% deck. So it doesn't lose all that bad. It doesn't win all that great. But probably a good player probably has a win rate above 50% with it. In terms of where its best matchups are, they're usually the creature-based ones, where things like Fatal Push and Stomp on Bonecrusher Giant really shine. Worst matchups are places where spot removal is bad, shockingly, Lotus Field being an example, and places where it's difficult to 1-for-1 your opponent. I think generally its worst matchup is usually Rakdos Sacrifice, where you can't Fatal Push a Cauldron Familiar, because if you do, they just bring it back with some food. So, if your opponent can outvalue you or make some of the cards in your hand bad, that's a bad matchup. If they want to play small creatures that you can kill easily, or draw a lot of spells into your Shieldred, that's going to be a good matchup for you.
Nice. Yeah. I see what you mean about it feeling like the Jund. It's just looks to be running a lot of good cards. Like, the other list I'm looking at has Shieldred the Apocalypse. We know that card's broken. Liliana the Veil, very much Boomer Jund. We love that. And for Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I know, every format play that card. And then just the removal package of it, just looks pretty, like, it looks good at landing a threat and then dealing with stuff. Yeah, we have like Duress, some Fatal Pushes, four Thoughtseize. Always love that. So it seems.
Yeah, it's the mid-range plan of cheap, efficient spells, beefy threats. I'll 1-for-1 you with my spells and I'll beat you around the head with my big beefy creature. I genuinely think Rakdos' worst matchup at times, or certainly its worst results at times, come from itself. It is a mid-range deck without any sort of card manipulation until you get to 3 mana with Fable. Technically blood tokens, but if you're cracking a blood token early, you're usually losing the game. So I will say when I've played the deck, a lot of my losses come from missing my 3rd land drop.
Okay, yeah.
It doesn't. It's the kind of deck that would love to have early cantrips, but obviously you don't get those in red black.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting because I think Pioneer is a deck very much where decks sort of wax and wane based on their metagame position. At this point where mono green, everyone was saying, "Oh, mono green's the best deck; it needs to be banned," but it really fell off a cliff because just some decks with good matchups against it were on the rise. Whereas Rakdos, I think, has never not been in amongst the top couple of decks basically since Fable's been printed. It can really tune itself to beat the majority of matchups according to what you expect in a metagame decision. Your sideboard choices really matter here.
On the back of what James said, I do think Rakdos is on the wane quite a bit, though. So I was playing a regional championship in Athens, the European one, and the stats were saying, Rakdos had been about, I think the week before it had been 28% and 22% at the regional championships. And I expected it to be probably about 25, a quarter of the room playing it. And I think it got to about 17 or 18%. And it's been slowly decreasing its meta share since then. I think it was very much the easy deck choice for a lot of people for a while. No, you couldn't go wrong picking Rakdos. But now people have realized that actually it does have one very notable bad matchup in Rakdos Sacrifice. And because the Pioneer's more diverse than it's ever been, you can't tune it to beat the field anymore. You have to accept you're going to have one of your worst matchups at least 5 to 10% of the field.
Oh yeah, 100%. And there's also sort of weird decks, which, as far as I could tell, purely exist to beat Rakdos. I think sort of the Fires of Invention decks. Angels, I don't think beats anything else in the format except for Rakdos. So
I can confirm it beats Boros Convoke really easily.
Oh, sure, yeah, okay, I could see that. But yeah, no, it's certainly a deck where if you're gunning for a particular matchup, unless it's one of the very lopsided ones, you can probably build your deck to beat it, but you can't build your deck to beat everything. I think the other thing to say about it is it's a deck where you can leverage your skill advantage very well. I sort of suspect this is why it ends up getting played so highly at a lot of the regional championships and things. I think people pick up Rakdos, they play it on Magic Online, they play it in their local store against slightly weaker players than they are. They win with it a lot because they can outplay them, and they show up at the regional championships where everyone's on a pretty good skill level, and it doesn't quite put up the numbers. But not to take anyone away from it, it's certainly one of the strongest decks in the format.
One thing I would say for Rakdos moving forward as well, because it's by its nature, it's a mid-range deck. It plays the best spells. It's kind of difficult for it to improve set on set. When you look at how mid-range decks improved in Modern, I think the biggest improvement on Jund was probably Fatal Push. You get one of those so infrequently that your deck won't change that much. It will always be playable, and you probably won't need that much cost to maintain it. But every set, the decks will get closer to you, which I think we saw with Master Machines. Mono green was a good matchup for Rakdos. Then, the metagame happens, Rakdos start to change their build, and Mono green picks up Pelucanos. And Pelucanos is just another threat that Mono green has to deal with. It's not some random card advantage spell that Mono green are trying to play or whatever they played in that spot. So that made the matchup harder. And I think we'll see that from future sets where the benefit Rakdos has over the metagame will get closer and closer.
The final thing to say on it is you're asking about pivoting from Standard into Pioneer. If you had the Rakdos midrange deck in Standard, you have a lot of the expensive cards for this, actually. You'll have Shieldreds, you'll have Fables, you pick up some Fort Caesars, you pick up some lands, you're most of the way there.
No, definitely. I think it's worth mentioning that this, from the list I'm looking at, this is possibly the most expensive deck. It's still about half the price of a modern deck, but from looking, it's around kind of like the $600 mark, which is like probably about $200 to $250 higher than more. But if this is like the gold standard,
this has 3 Shieldreds in it, right? Which is what, $200 now or something.
Yeah.
I think Rakdos is going to be the most expensive deck with 4 Fables and 3 Shieldreds. You're going to do well to have a more expensive deck than Rakdos.
No, exactly. But yeah, as it's kind of like the gold standard, it's if you were to invest with this, there is always a world where Shieldred and Fable could be banned, but like Shieldred hasn't been banned in anything else. Fable was banned in standard, but seems to be fine in every other format. But
I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'd say I would be amazed if they make any bans off the back of Rakdos Midrange. I think Shieldred as a 4-mana creature that dies to removal spells should never get banned. And I know people will say Fable's strong, but I think it's not strong enough to get banned. And there are other powerful cards in Pioneer that have survived longer. So I don't think it will get banned, and I'd advocate for it to not be banned.
No, awesome. Makes a lot of sense. All right, should we move on to our second Rakdos deck of the day? You did mention this as having a pretty good matchup against the mid-range deck, but James, do you want to talk a bit about Rakdos Sacrifice?
Yeah, for sure. So Rakdos Sacrifice is an archetype that has existed in many formats throughout Magic. I'd say it's the ever-present of limited formats for Rakdos Sacrifice. But this deck is really built around the core Sacrifice engine is Cauldron Familiar with Witch's Oven, which people may be familiar with from Standard and other formats. So Witch's Oven...
Wasn't it banned in Standard? Sorry.
It did end up being banned in Standard, I think. So Witch's Oven is a single mana artifact, tap it to sack a creature and make a food. And Cauldron Familiar is black for a 1/1. When it ETBs, you drain for 1, and you can sack food to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if you just have those 2 cards, you can keep sacking your Witch's Oven, you can keep sacking your Cauldron Familiar, bringing it back, maybe you get a chump block with it. That's fine, you're getting some life, you're getting some, you're dealing them some damage, but it really starts popping off when you have other things triggering off that sacrifice, the key one here being Mayhem Devil. The 3-mana 3/3, whenever you sack a permanent, it deals 1/20 target. And I'd say the strength of Mayhem Devil does a lot for determining which matchups this deck shines in and which ones it doesn't. For example, if you play this deck against mono white, it almost feels like a buy, like their cards just trade for your cats anyway, and then Mayhem Devil will just mow down their board and generally the turn you play it. Outside of those cards, it has Disruptive Elements, it has 4 Thoughtseize normally, for Fatal Push, and then it has the main card draw engine for the deck gets is Deadly Dispute, which is a very nice one for deck because you obviously sacking a permanent is not a big cost in this deck. Sometimes it's an upside. Then you draw 2 cards and you make a treasure. Sacrificing the treasure is then more triggers on your Mayhem Devil. So really, really good matchup against Rakdos Midrange in general because you're pretty good against their removal. Obviously, your creatures recur. Cards like Focus is very strong against them, and then and obviously you have 4 Fables to grind out some value. Also, very, very strong against small creature decks. On the other hand, you really don't want to play against mono green with this deck, which is a very sizable player in the format. They just go bigger than you. The downside with this deck, I guess, is you're not disrupting mono green in a very meaningful way, and beyond just killing their elves, and they will just go bigger than you, quicker than you kill them. You don't kill them that quickly. You're more about the slow. You're maybe draining them for, even if you're getting in 4 or 5 points a turn, they will go quicker than that. And then the big hammer for mono green is the Khan will shut off basically your whole deck because you can no longer activate your Witch's Oven, and that's a really big problem. and your treasure no longer works. But yeah, it's a really cool deck. It has some really good matchups. I think it's an important metagame player. But you do have to. There are some matchups that are just bad, and you can't really do anything about it.
I think it says a lot about Sacrifice, how it's gone through the regional championship seasons. I think, for example, before this past season, it was a deck that people would play. There were some notable players like Sam Pardee, who that was all they would play. But it's grown and grown through the RC season. Its results have been pretty good. It's usually one of the top 3 decks at the tournament that it's played in, and more people have picked it up as we've gone on. I think at the start of the season, the US regional championships, it probably wouldn't have made the top 10 list. Towards the end, it's generally one of the most played and one of the best results. I think people have picked it up and tested with it a lot. It had a massive evolution point where I started putting Thoughtseize in the main deck instead of like Village Rights, I think. And yeah, it does benefit from the metagame. Mono green has decreased in popularity as we've gone through the year. Even another bad matchup like Greasefang has kind of fallen off into relative obscurity, and decks that it's good against, like mono white, blue white spirits, they've picked up in popularity, and Mayhem Devil starts licking their lips when they see small creatures.
Yeah, 100%.
No, definitely. Yeah, this looks like a ton of fun. Yeah, I remember playing a bit of Witch's Oven before. And yeah, quick question on this. The version on MTG Goldfish that I'm looking at has Gigantha as a companion. Is that super relevant? Or is it just the fact that you can run a free 5-mana 5/5 in the deck? You might as well.
Yeah, you give up nothing.
Well, so they used to have to play Kari Zev's Expertise in the sideboard because they needed a really bad card to be able to beat some cards out of mono green, and Act of Treason, Sacrifice your Cavalier of Thorns was the best they could come up with. And then they printed Furnace Rains in whichever set it was, James.
March Machines.
March Machines. And Furnace Rains has the advantage of only having 1 red pip in it, and therefore making Gigantha a complete free roll in the stack. I don't know how often it comes up, but I don't think it's squeezed enough on sideboard slots that you turn down a free Philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, you play against something like Rakdos, you're Thoughtseizing each other a bunch, you're killing each other's creatures. At some point, just, I have an extra card, even if I'm playing a total of 8 mana to put this 5/5 into play. It ends up mattering, another card's another card. You can also, loot it away with Fable and try and dig for something better. It costs you nothing, and there are grindy matchups where it does end up mattering.
No, awesome. Oh yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, good to see the companions are still very prevalent in every format they can be played in, I guess. All right, Alex, you want to take away with a deck that we've mentioned a couple of times? This seems to be like one of the big ones. Nykthos Ramp.
Yeah, so Nykthos Ramp, firstly, will get called a multitude of things. Nykthos Ramp, Mono Green Devotion, Mono Green Ramp. It's the big mana deck of the format. It's the Tron of the format for me. The idea is to get a lot of mana early, play big spells, kind of go over the top of everybody. It does have a combo angle with Khan, the Great Creator, being able to fetch whatever the cauldron's called.
Pestilent Cauldron.
Pestilent Cauldron, which has a sorcery on the back that exiled itself on resolution, which name I also can't remember. But if you can generate, it used to be 14 mana, but the Chain Veil changes the math slightly. If you can generate enough mana, you can go infinite by return, looping Khans and Kioras. Costs the green spell causes each player to gain life. Everyone gains a lot of life, and then you eventually play Pestilent Cauldron and mill your opponent out. I think the combo side of it has become less and less relevant because actually it's just a good deck at putting big beaters into play. It's had a few nice additions in recent sets with the triple green Pelucranos and Cityscape Leveler, which are really nice pickups. It's also a Storm the Festival deck, which is both mana advantage, card advantage, and a late game mana sink with a flashback, which makes it quite resilient against the mid-range Thoughtseize deck. They're generally its best matchups. It's got better against Rakdos Midrange. We talked about it being good against Sacrifice. Its bad matchups are generally going to be the aggro decks, where they don't give you enough time to set up. Because obviously you don't want to be blocking with your Llanowar Elves on turn 1. That's not really what it's in the deck to do. So anything like mono-white humans, blue-white spirits, Boros Convoke, pretty bad matchups. And the blue-red spells decks, the Indomitable Creativity and like Phoenix decks, they can be bad matchups depending on how they're tuned, but you are a deck that is quite weak to Aethergust.
That makes sense. Is this the build that was running Teferi Sets the Sun or something like that? Is this deck? Because I remember being briefly annoyed at, like, why is this mono green deck running an Azorius spell?
mono green's been through a few evolutions. First, it was play an Overgrown Tomb for the Pestilent Cauldron.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was play Nicol Bolas, Dragon Guard, or whatever the red, triple black, blue Planeswalker is. Nicol Bolas was also a win condition. And then the Fairy Who Slows the Sunset was the final build of that, where, yes, they were playing an Azorius Planeswalker to untap things.
For people wondering how all this works, Mono Green runs 4 copies of Oath of Nissa, which is a cantrip, which is also an enchantment that stays in play. Mostly you're just doing this to dig for your Nykthos and your creatures, but it also allows you to cast Planeswalker using any color of mana. So your Boluses, your Teferis, you can just cast for green.
Yeah. There was also a stage where they would run Sylvan Caryatid, and for Teferi they might run like a Temple Garden. But yeah, the aim was cast it off an Oath of Nissa or a Storm the Festival. You can obviously get them off there. I think people have realised instead of playing these slightly janky combo angles, if they just play better green cards, the combo is still reasonably easy to get off in the games where you would want it. So just play better green cards and don't resort to playing Planeswalkers that didn't really make an impact on Standard, never mind Pioneer.
Yeah, also, I think like in 90% of your matchups, the combo doesn't matter at all. It's because it still plays really in my mind like a combo deck, but the result of your combo is I have like 3 Pioneer of Cavalier of Thorns, 2 Old Growth Trolls, 2 Pelucranos in play. I'm flashing back my Storm the Festival. I'm untapping my Nykthos. I'm not running out of mana. Storm the Festival is like 4 for 1. I have my Karn going. Most, like 90% of decks, it doesn't matter if you don't actually kill them that turn, because their game plans are no longer relevant. There are matchups where it matters. I think like specifically Lotus Field, because Lotus Field can just be like, nice board idiot, I untap and kill you. So I think in those spots it matters, but I think Mono Green got quite a nice boost in those matchups from the Stone Brain being printed. It's a very nice thing to Karn for that can disrupt their combo lines. Which I think leaves mostly its weak matchups at this point are aggressive creature decks that are just quicker than you, and the deck is fairly weak to counter spells. I'd say not so much I think blue-white has an okay matchup against it, where it's just trying to counter everything, but that can be quite tough because, flashing back Storm the Festival requires 2 counter spells. But if you can have a good proactive game plan backed up by 1 counterspell, goes quite far in this matchup. So, yeah, the creativity decks do this quite well. Spirits is fantastic against Mono Green. I think that's quite a large reason for that deck being a big metagame player, because it has that combination of pressure and just enough disruption to stop them going over the top.
No, fantastic. Yeah, just looking at this deck, just looking at it goes, there's no 2-drops in the deck. I mean, maybe 1 Invasion of Ixalan, but yeah, I love a deck where you are going 1-drop, 3-drop, and you're doing nothing else. Let's go.
Yes, if you look at your 7-card hand and it does not have an Elvish Mystic or a Llanowar Elves, you will put it back and try and find a good 6.
Fantastic. Nice. Well, should we move on to our next deck? James, I think you're up with this. Do you want to take us away with Mono White Humans?
Sure. So this is the classic white weenie deck of the format, really. The humans tribal angle obviously coming from Thalia's Lieutenant, but it has all the staples you would expect from mono white, really. It has Thalia and a lot of white 1-drops. This is really a deck where it feels like most of your matchups, you either like 25% to win or 75% to win. There's not a lot of close ones in here. We've rattled off a couple of decks like, mono green can never beat mono white, really. Lotus Fields, I think, similar. You're just going underneath these big mana decks really, really effectively. But having said that, you queue into Rakdos Sacrifice, it's going to be really embarrassing. Fatal Push is very effective here. It has some games. It has some high impact creatures. You have to respect it. I think specifically the Adeline is a really big part of this deck because a lot of the good removal in the format is damage based. There's a lot of red decks where their interaction for you is going to be fiery impulses and the like. And Adeline having 4 toughness is something you do have to respect in those decks with your sideboard choices. But I kind of view playing mono white mostly as a metagame call. If you're expecting a lot of mono green, if you're expecting a lot of Lotus Field, you can show up with mono white and have a really good day. But you're just accepting that you have some pretty unwinnable matchups. And to be honest, you don't have a lot of game. You're not there aren't really much where you're like, oh, well, I can do this thing differently and then actually have a good alternative plan. You kind of just do the thing that you do.
Out of interest, how's the... I know it's only been out for a couple of months, but I'm assuming Coppergoat Vanguard, the one that gives other humans +1/+0 in Ward 1, I'm assuming that's helped in some of the matchups where it was previously less favourable. Like Fatal Push, they'll probably still pay for it, but like just Mayhem, that makes Mayhem Devil, I'm assuming, much worse.
It's helped. The issue with Coppercoat Vanguard is that it doesn't give it Stealth Ward.
Yes, okay.
So generally it's a bit like a Crusade or Anthem style effect for attacking. You play it, you get one attack out of it, but it's going to die the next turn if they can.
Right, okay, yeah.
It does help the deck. It is a good card, but it doesn't really make it better where it was already bad. Just looking at the list, 22 lands, for example, seems fairly common. You do have 4 Mutavolts. Mutavolt's a very strong magic card, but 22 lands puts you in a position where you can mulligan because you miss your land drop. You might have a 1-land hand and not much to do with 1 land, but then you might also flood at the wrong time. So it does have general mana issues in quantity that cause it to lose games. I think what James said about it is a very good metagame call. If you think mono green's going to be good, Lotus Field, the blue red spells deck, Thalia is a very good card against them. But yeah, in a field where Rakdos are pretty much decked number 1 and 2, mono white's going to be traumatizing to play.
Yeah, it always feels like if you register a deck like this, you're kind of just rolling the dice, right? Yeah, there's you don't have much play. You either run into your good matchups or you don't.
I guess one thing to say for it though is, of all the ones that I think we're going to be looking at today, this is probably the cheapest. This is around $200. Like the most expensive card is it's actually a sideboard card. It's for Wedding Announcement in the sideboard. If that sounds pretty budget to me. Like, yes, I'm sure. Yes, Wedding Announcement is a good card, but 150 quid for a Pioneer deck seems pretty good. Like, that's a very good way of getting into a format.
And mono white humans are always going to be a creature type that gets printed. It's always going to be a deck that's there or thereabouts in playability. Going to have cards coming from new sets. And like I say, it's a meta deck that I think will only get better. So yeah, if you're looking for an entrance into Pioneer and you like turning your creature sideways for attack specifically, I think it's a very good deck to pick up.
Fantastic. Well, Alex, I think you're up next. Do you want to give us the overview for Azorius Spirits?
Yeah, so Spirits, just as a bit of a background, Spirits throughout Pioneer's life have kind of been in three pretty diverse camps. You had the Mono Blue Spirits deck, which played a bit like Mono Blue Delver played, and it plays in Pauper. You have your 1-drop, you play a bunch of spells to protect it. You had Bant Spirits, which was the bigger I'm going to collect a company into value creature deck, with your Spell Quellers, your Skyclave Apparitions. And originally you had this quite linear aggro version of Blue-White Spirits with, it was Watcher of the Spheres, which isn't even a spirit, so it is slightly cheating. But it has some synergy with flying creatures, and it gets quite big from memory. And I think somewhere along the line, people realised that the green mana for Bant Spirits was costly, but the elements of Bant Spirits that we liked were Spell Queller. And the Delver style of Mono Blue was generally pretty awkward against most of the formats. So they kind of combined Bant with Mono Blue. You get Blue-White Spirits, which is much more an aggressive tempo style deck. It's got a little bit of that Delver style gameplay, a little bit of your almost Mono White style in that I'm going to play creatures and my lords, and I'm just going to attack you. It's, I think, important cards in the deck. Curious Obsession is a big reason why Blue-White Spirits is a contender. If you can suit your 1-drop up with a Curious Obsession, every time you hit your opponent, you draw a card. You can play that tempo 1-for-1 game. Other important cards, I think Rattlechains is very undervalued in how important that card is for the deck. If you get a Rattlechains on the board and it sticks, you basically get to play all your game at instant speed, which is a massive advantage. In terms of how it's gone, it's been picking up popularity through the season. I think it came second in the European Regional Championship. I think it's kind of grown from there. Its good matchups, its best matchup is Mono Green. I think, as James mentioned when we talked about Mono Green, a threat with Counterspell is very good in that matchup. Very good against Greasefang. I think it's pretty good against Lotus Field from memory. Bad matchups, however, is exactly the same as Mono White. You don't want to see someone play a Blood Crypt on turn 1. Rakdos Midrange, Rakdos Sacrifice will beat you most of the time.
Yeah, I think the other thing to say about this deck is, so the counter magic in Pioneer is generally just not very good. Like, it's often well positioned, so people will play it. But if you look at a lot of the other blue decks, their 2-mana counter spell is Make Disappear with no creatures to sacrifice, just basically a quench 2-mana counter unless you pay 2. However, there's a couple of counter spells that work very, very well specifically in this deck. So there's Lofty Denial, which is 2 mana for Force Spike. However, if you control a creature with flying, it's counter unless they pay 4 instead. And they also have Geistlight Snare, which is 3 mana for counter unless they pay 3, but it costs 1 less if you control a spirit and 1 less if you control an enchantment. So you do have a really good nut draw of like 1-drop on spirit on turn 1. On turn 2, you can play Curious Obsession and have Geistlight Snare up, which is phenomenal. So it gets to, and obviously Spell Queller is very strong. So I think it gets to play that permission game a lot better than in a much more efficient way than a lot of other decks.
Yeah, I think Spell Queller was a key innovation in this deck, actually. I think taking this deck from being mono blue to being blue-white, when I've played this deck, Spell Queller feels like just a house of a card, right? Spell Queller-ing a Shieldred feels amazing. It might be a bad matchup, but it still feels amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I think Invasion of Gobekhan from the recent set was quite a big add for this deck as well, mostly out of a sideboard, but it does a lot of work. If you play against these combo decks and you get this, so it takes the card out of their hand, they have to pay 2 more to cast it, but if then you flip it into this enchantment that buffs all your creatures, it protects your creatures, it does all the things you want to do in those matchups. I've also had very bad experiences of trying to play Shark Typhoon as my sideboard cards for spirits. And then you take your Shark Typhoon, you can't cycle it anymore. It's really very sad.
Yeah, and I think another reason this deck grew in popularity is actually worth saying just the mana base. this deck's benefited from Seachrome Coast and the Darker Waste being made legal in Pioneer. Whilst Rakdos Midrange and Rakdos Sacrifice were both still playable, the two lands have really made blue-white mana bases work a lot better.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. I'm assuming with the Seachrome Coast, that completed the full cycle of fast lands into Pioneer, which I'm assuming is a pretty big deal. The fast lands are phenomenal.
Yeah, having the fast lands, pain lands, pathways, and shock lands mean that 2-color aggro decks have really good mana bases now. And the other thing to say about this deck is it is playing some Mutavaults, so getting the mana to work is key.
Mm-hmm.
And, no one really wants to be playing a Port Town in there. Well, no one wants to play Port Town in their commander deck. Never mind their Pioneer deck.
Cool. Right. Well, I think let's move on to our next deck. So we're staying with the Azorius. James, you want to talk about blue-white control?
I'd love to talk about blue-white control, Daniel. This is blue-white control is. Blue-white control is a deck that exists in pretty much every standard format, right? This is it's in a lot of ways what you'd expect. You have all the big hitters of blue and white control cards from the last 10 years of Magic. That's really good. You get Supreme Verdict from the first set that's legal in this format, Return to Ravnica, and you get your Narsets, you get your 5-mana Teferi, your Wandering Emperor, and you play a lot of good permission. It has the problems you'd expect for a blue-white control deck as well. You can be pretty weak to hand disruption. It actually doesn't have a great Rakdos matchup. But the Planeswalkers are really where you're getting your money here. The Planeswalker suite of like Narset, Wandering Emperor, 5-mana Teferi is very, very strong. 3-mana Teferi regrettably banned in the format, but
thank God.
No regrets about 3-mana Teferi.
I'll acknowledge this as a minority opinion. The downsides that you get playing blue-white is your spot removal just isn't fantastic. You have your options are basically March of Otherworldly Light, Portable Hole, or what's the stupid planes one called?
Lay Down Arms.
Lay Down Arms, which is 1 mana. You exile to power less than or equal to number of planes, but that really limits what your mana base has to look like. It has some pretty severe costs, and that can lead you to be pretty weak against some really quick decks. But yeah, your Planeswalkers are very hard to outvalue, and you have good sweepers in Supreme Verdict, and actually also Temporary Lockdown was a really nice addition for this deck. That's the 1 white Oblivion Rings everything with CMC 2 or less. That really helps in a lot of the matchups where you're naturally weakest. Wipes up the elves or it's phenomenal against Rakdos Sacrifice. You kill all the ovens, all the cats, all the food, all the blood, even like the Fable tokens and whatnot. So that's a really nice one. And then so you're combining. Then you're obviously combining this with some card draw and like Memory Deluge and Behold Multiverse. There's a lot of choices about how you build this deck. You'll very often look at it and it'll be like 1s and 2s all the way down, because it's do I want the third Make Disappear or the third Dovin's Veto and these sorts of decisions. So you do have to really tune your deck sort of week on week depending on what you're expecting. The other thing to say is it does win very slowly. You need to be. This is a very real thing in tournament play. You need to be able to play this deck quite quickly, or you will pick up a lot of draws, and you don't do well in tournaments that way. And you need, if you're showing up to a 8-round event playing blue-white control, you need some stamina. The 7th round, you've played a lot of Magic. When everyone else has been outside having a coffee between rounds, you've been playing up to the 50th minute every round. unless you've been losing. You can lose very quickly, but you never win quickly.
I think the biggest life improvement I've seen James do at Pioneer tournaments when he's tried to play this is to buy his lunch before the tournament starts.
I think registering other decks was also a life improvement, but it is fun. I think it is actually very well positioned in a lot of ways at the moment. It does have game against most things, and there are some decks that are really weak to counter magic, like the Fires mentioned decks and whatnot. I think it's not in a bad spot, but you have to be very comfortable playing it. It's a very decision-intensive deck, and you need the right build week on week. And yeah, you do have. I think you're a slight underdog against Rakdos. Against things like Mono White, you're going to struggle, but and against Lotus Field, you're not fantastic. But I think the deck is pretty well positioned at the moment.
Yeah, it's ranged over the tournament season. To be fair, from being a very strong deck to being a very memed deck, to be honest. It had a tournament where I think it was the third most played deck on day one with about 30 people playing it, and it put one person into day two.
Oh, wow. What do they all give up after playing 8 hours of continuous Magic? It's like, no, it's not worth it.
They all just went to the pub after round 5.
But yeah, that was followed up by, I think it was the Nerd Range Gaming Championships that had a blue-white control mirror in the final, and then it went all the way to, I think it was the second best performing deck at the European Regional Championship. I think it is definitely a deck you need to practice with. I think all the things James said about playing it so you don't get draws. I think it's one where better players do make it look good, and obviously when worse players pick it up, it's going to have bad results. All in all, not a deck for the faint of heart. You've got to really mean it.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. This is the complete opposite of anything I want to do. Like, can I just double check with you? Is the win condition of this deck 2 Shark Typhoon? Or is there
the one Fairy Emblem is a win condition.
The very emblem. Okay, cool. The -8 emblem. Cool.
Yeah. So you
cool.
I don't know if you played this standard, Daniel. It's fantastic. What you do is you have your Fairy Emblem going. So they have no permanents in play, and then your win condition is that when you have no cards left in your library, you're going to tuck your Teferi. Your Teferi can target itself with a -3. You're going to tuck the Teferi every turn until they deck.
Great.
Most people have the good grace to concede by this point, but that is a win condition. But the Wandering Emperor can win the game as well.
Yeah, there's the Wandering Emperor. There's a couple of Hall of Storm Giant. Usually there'll be a Castle Arden Vale, so you can beat down with 1/1 tokens. It doesn't win quickly, with the exception of Hall of Storm Giants, but usually when it wins, it's been winning for about 10 turns.
No, cool. Makes sense. Some people will love this. Keep me as far away from this pile of nonsense as possible, please. Cool. All right. Well, I guess from what I think is a pile of nonsense to maybe what is more. I don't know. This one, it has the word combo in the title, so let's give this a go. Alex, do you want to talk about Lotus Field combo, aka Hidden Strings?
Yes. So talking of decks that some people love and some people hate, if you like to sit down for 10 minutes whilst your opponent takes a lot of game actions, this is totally the deck for you to play against. Lotus Field combo is all about the namesake card, Lotus Field, copying it with Thespian Stage, and using what I refer to as twiddle effects, but basically spells that untap lands to generate obscene amounts of mana. And then from there, when you've got so much mana, like you can kill them with a ham sandwich. The common one is Emergent Ultimatum. That lets you go and get 3 spells, one of which is usually Omniscience, and another one will be a way to tutor up Omniscience, and the third will be a way to generate mana to cast the Omniscience. So what usually happens is your opponent puts Omniscience into your library, you tutor up Omniscience, you play Omniscience, and you just get to go from there. The win con from there usually involves Approach of the Second Sun, tutored up from your sideboard with one of many ways. It has developed recently with Chandra, Beacon of Hope. And then the win con is, I would say, slightly more convoluted because it's like one copy of Chandra and multiple Barliged recoveries.
Okay, love that.
it's possibly quicker because you dome your opponent for 4 times, but you do have to keep buying back your Chandra and copying your Barligad recovery. So, it's obviously a deck that takes a lot of practice. You sit down, you need to know your lines. In terms of what it's good and bad against, anything that can interact with it meaningfully through like the Tharli attacks, anything that can attack it aggressively, like spirits with counters, they're bad matchups. We mentioned green having the Stone Brain, but also traditionally green being able to tutor up the best card against you, which is Damping Sphere. It's another thing that is one thing. If people want to beat Lotus Field, they put Damping Sphere in their sideboard. So, you are very targetable. Good matchups tend to be things like Rakdos Midrange and Enigmatic Fires, where their interaction doesn't line up well against you. Fatal Push is not good if you're going to Fatal Push an Arboreal Grazer. No one's ever felt good about that trade.
Yeah, I guess Hand Attack isn't that good either because it has a lot of... If buying things back from your graveyard is part of your strategy, you don't care if they... It's annoying, but it's not the end of the world if they, duress you or something.
Yeah, you can't Thoughtseize the lands out of their hand. I mean, you can if you hit specifically Sylvan Scrying. But from my experience, if you ever Thoughtseize them and take Sylvan Scrying, they draw the Lotus Field.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can't Thoughtseize the Lotus Field, and that's the important card in the matchup. You can slow them down by Field of Ruining a Thespian Stage. If you do play this deck, always make sure you copy the Lotus Field as soon as you can. I have seen too many people play a Thespian Stage, pass the turn, and then realize Field of Ruin does not use the stack.
Right,
and
yes.
they cannot respond to it coming into play.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, I think this is the deck in Pioneer that you need to practice the most with. I've been in paper tournaments and I've won games where I think if I were against people who knew their deck better, I wouldn't have won.
No, it makes sense. And I guess this is a complicated combo deck. This is one that you can practice and work out your lines, work out what's best for most situations.
It's also one of the most Marmite decks in the format.
I can imagine, yes.
If you like not having friends, this is a deck for you.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, I think the way you felt about blue-white control, this is exactly how I feel about this deck. It's, I think sort of basically all the other decks in the format, I think if I was a tournament, this was very well positioned. I could practice it a bunch for a week and be decent with it. Whereas with this, I think I might just quit Magic instead. It's what really. So it's very one of those decks where you have to. It's a lot about calculating. If you're good at it, if you're good at chess, you're probably decent at this deck. I'm not that good at chess and very bad at Lotus Field. It's certainly. You need to be able to think through your lines. As you'll often see a Lotus Field player will draw their card for a turn, think intensely for 5 minutes, play a tap land and pass the turn. Because you do need to think through your entire line to the win and make sure you can get there, because if you fizzle, you will fizzle really bad if you're 1 mana short. But it is strong. It has some very, very good matchups. But not great against aggro. Counter spells can be very effective against it if they're backed up by pressure or a proactive plan. The sort of blue-white control, sit back and counter everything forever plan, I've not found to be very effective against this. They just have too many cards you need to counter, and Lier being uncounterable is a massive problem. That's for the 5 mana. Lier's got the 5 mana that then makes all your spells uncounterable.
The other line against counterspells, as I keep finding out every time I try to play against Lotus Field with counterspells, is they hidden strings you and your lands in main phase 1 and skip to main phase 2, and you sit there holding your counterspell and well, I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
No, I think it's good that this kind of variety of deck exists, though. Like it is a sign of a healthy format that you can have this kind of bollocks basically existing.
Yeah, I mean, this is Twiddlestorm from Modern of a Bygone Era, right? I think every format needs a combo deck. This is the purest combo deck in the format. Love it or hate it, I think it's a good thing to have in the metagame.
No, exactly. It keeps
if you want to beat it, you put Damping Sphere in your sideboard. They can blow up a Damping Sphere, but it slows them down enough that if you really dislike Lotus Field, go and put 4 Damping Sphere in your sideboard. You're going to lose to other games because your sideboard's not very good. Well, at least you release Lotus Field.
Yeah, for sure. Although it is true. So this is a deck I think that makes the best use out of the channel lands in the format. So it all plays like 2 or 3 Besejus and a couple of Otawaras, and it has Sylvan Scrying to go and find them. So it will very reliably be able to get rid of hate pieces. But yeah, as I said, it does slow them down by like whole turn. And if you're scrying for that, then you're not scrying for a Thespian Stage or a Lotus Field.
Sick. Yeah, and on a quick aside, always the fact that our Boreal Grazer is a constructed card in 2023 is insane. But with that, let's move on to our next deck. I think this one's coming back to you, Alex, because I think you've had a bit of reps with this one. I want to talk about Boros Convoke a little bit.
Yes, I have played more Boros Convoke than I probably should have done. So this was the deck I registered for RC Athens, albeit the wrong version of it. And this is the deck I am playing at RCQs this season. The idea is it's a very synergy-driven game, but you play a lot of small creatures early so that you can power out a Convoke creature ahead of time. The Convoke creatures are Knight Errant of Eos, which is a 5-mana 4/4, and you get to put up to 2 creatures in your hand depending on how many creatures convoked it. And Venerated Loxodon, which is also a 5-mana 4/4, and when it enters the battlefield, it puts a counter on every creature that convoked it. To power them out, you play Thraben Inspector and Voldaran Epicure. They both create an artifact when they enter the battlefield, which you can use, or you can destroy, I should say, with the Gleeful Demolition. Thraben Inspector, Gleeful Demolition, and 1 untapped mana on turn 2 is a 5-drop. Your very best draws will put 14 power into play on turn 2, which is pretty hard to beat for most decks in any format that isn't vintage. Doesn't happen all that often. The deck does have some consistency issues. You're an aggro deck that plays a bit like a combo deck, so you do have to mulligan. And obviously, with synergy-driven decks, and when you're playing cards as bad as Voldaran Epicure in your Pioneer deck, you want to have as many of them in your hand as possible. You do have a reasonable backup plan in Reckless Bushwhacker. So that's the Surge feature from, I won't say Oath of the Gatewatch, but it might be Battle for Zendikar. And that makes your small go wide plan like a nice plan B. There's a divide, or I think the divide's kind of less important now, but originally there was a divide between which 2-drop you played. You either played Reckless Bushwhacker alongside Burning Tree Emissary, so that you could have really busted starts where, if you're Live the Dream and you have 3 or 4 emissaries and a Bushwhacker in your hand, you're going to hit them really hard on turn 2. I think the way the deck's gone is to play Clarion Spirit. So Clarion Spirit is a 2/2 that whenever you play your second spell, you make a 1/1 Flying Spirit token. And it means the deck has, a plan C. It obviously works with the Convoke stuff. I think that's where more people have settled on the deck. In terms of its good matchups, it's one of the only decks that I think can claim to have a really good Rakdos Midrange matchup. Because you play Knight Errant of Eos' card advantage, and because a lot of your cards are actually inherent 2-for-1s, like Thraben Inspector isn't a strong card, but it is a 2-for-1. Gleeful Demolition is a 3-for-1, kind of like a 3 for -1, so it's kind of like a 2-for-1. Like Rakdos can't 1-for-1 you. The decks tend to play 3 or 4 main deck Giant Killers, which means Shieldred doesn't tend to be a problem. So you tend to be able to beat Rakdos quite well. Mono Green's a good matchup. Standard, you're an aggro deck, you'll beat Mono Green. And things like Lotus Field can be good matchup, but because your deck's so it's tied into having a good draw, a good matchup and a bad matchup can basically be more to do with your mulligan decisions and kind of how lucky you are. That said, bad matchups, Rakdos Sacrifice is pretty miserable. You play a deck full of X1s and they Mayhem Devil you down. Not a position you want to be in. And blue-white control with temporary lockdown. I've found the games to be very interesting, and you can definitely win, but I think it's unfavourable for converting against blue-white control.
No, that's fair. No, that's cool. And I think worth saying as well, this is also one of the cheaper ones as well. It's slightly pricier, I'm guessing, just because you need some dual lands in there than just straight mono white. But everything else is pretty reasonably priced.
Yeah, it's one of the cheaper decks. It's also one of the newer decks. It broke out where it had a Magic Online challenge, where I think he put 2 or 3 people into the top 8. But yeah, a deck that plays 4 Ornithopters alongside 4 Resolute Reinforcements. No one puts those cards together particularly quickly in a format. So it did take some time to come about. It's one of those decks that's definitely still evolving and being tuned. I think the deck I played at Athens, about a month later, I would say, was horribly built. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And it's probably a deck that will benefit from future sets. I mean, it does need kind of niche things. It would really like another 1-drop that generates an artifact. But if it gets that, then it's more powerful. I mean, I doubt it's going to get a second copy of Gleeful Demolition, but a boy can dream.
So I've not played a lot. Well, I've not played at all with this deck. I've not played that much against it. Just from looking at the list, it does seem nice, but spot removal really doesn't look very effective against you. Like the 1-drops, none of them are good to kill with a fatal push. They all give you value. Might slow you down a little bit, but it's quite nice that the artifacts you're targeting with your Gleeful Demolition are mostly not creatures, right? So they can't blow you out. And yeah, being an aggro deck where Fatal Push and Fiery Impulse really aren't very good cards against you seems like quite a nice place to be.
Yeah, the other benefit actually as well, you're kind of a go wide aggro deck. But because of the way the deck's built, the most commonly played sweepers in Pioneer don't tend to be that good against you. If you have a good draw, which is when people will mostly need their sweepers, Extinction Event, for example, will not hit all your board because you'll have a mixture of odd and even creatures. Something like Ritual of Soot or even Temporary Lockdown, they don't hit the 5-drops. So if you get a Knight Errant draw, for example, and they go, oh, kill all your small creatures, you do still have a 4/4 to beat them around the head with. People play Meat Hook Massacre, which I think is better against you, but obviously ends up being expensive. The best sweeper against it is actually Languish. The problem is that Languish has issues in other matchups, and Convoke's probably not important enough to warrant changing your sideboard plans for.
Yeah, that seems super specific for this deck because everything's specifically for toughness or less.
Yeah, so people play Extinction Event because it's better against mono green. Languish not killing things with 5 toughness and 6 toughness against mono green is an issue.
Yeah, and not getting shielded as well.
Not getting shielded. And then I think one of the other things about this deck is, we mentioned it when we talked about spirits, it's a very good Invasion of Gobekhan deck. There are draws, usually post-board, because this will play at post-board, but there are draws where you will play an Ornithopter on turn 1, Gleeful Demolition your Ornithopter, so that you can flip an Invasion of Gobekhan on turn 2. And when they happen, they're really good. When you're in the semi-finals or an RCQ and you miss your second land drop and don't get to do it, they feel a lot worse.
Ooh, I'm sorry. Right. Let's move on to our next deck. This is definitely one I've heard a fair bit about. I'm quite surprised to see it slightly further down the list in terms of results, because I thought this was quite a strong one. But James, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, sure. So this is a combo deck which is attempting to play Greasefang Okiba Boss, which is a 3-mana 4/3, which beginning of combat on your turn returns a vehicle from a graveyard to a battlefield and gives it haste. Goes back to your hand at end step. They're trying to play that with ideally Parhelion in your graveyard. If you get to do that, then you can crew your Parhelion using the Greasefang. You attack with Parhelion, which is a 5/5. You make 2 4/4 angels, which are attacking, and the game mostly ends. And that is pretty much the whole thing the deck is trying to do. If you look at all of the other card choices, pretty much they are very geared to do that thing. You have 2-drops like Raffine's Informant, for example. Probably not a card people were picking immediately when it came out to see a lot of play, but it is a 2-mana 2/1 which loots and sometimes gets a counter, but it's another way to put Parhelion in your graveyard and dig for your Greasefang. You have to also say to Wayfinders, Scrapwork Mutt is kind of a new one, does a very similar thing. And so obviously the downside of this is, well, what if people kill your Greasefang? And this where Can't Stay Away really shines. This is Orzhov for sorcery, return a creature with CMC 3 or less from your graveyards for battlefield, and it has flashback for 5. That's really good at letting you grind through those removal spells. It's things like Grizzly Salvage, you can mill you, get your Greasefang back. Powerful deck, can do its thing on turn 3 at a pretty decent chunk of the games, but it is one-dimensional. You're obviously vulnerable to things like Graveyard Hate. You have ways to mitigate that. You have things like Beside You, and Witherbloom Command is often played here. It can blow up something like an Unlicensed Hearse. But it can certainly have issues with Graveyard Hate. It can have issues with people who can just exile your Greasefang or grind through those Can't Stay Aways. Also has a particular weakness against mono green. Khan the Great Creator is really, really bad news for this deck because of that Stony Silence effect for your opponent. You return your Parhelion and then can't activate the crew ability, and it doesn't do anything. It does tend to have quite a nice matchup against Rakdos Midrange, I think, is a lot of reasons to play it. Because sure, they can kill your first Greasefang, but they often can't beat the Can't Stay Away, and you also have your sort of backup vehicle to return is a Seeker's Chariot, but a Seeker's Chariot is also just very castable and a generically good card in a matchup like Rakdos, where they're trying to kill all of your things. It makes a lot of bodies. I think this deck's really powerful. It has some bad matchups. I think it has really fallen down recently. I can see why, but I'm pretty sure it will make a comeback at some point, you know?
Yeah, Greasefang had a terrible regional championship season. It was I can't remember seeing a tournament where it was above 50% win rate, to be honest.
Yeah. But it felt like going into that, it was a real like bogeyman of a format, right? And was that just, you think people were really prepared for it?
It was the second best performing deck with a notable number of played in Chinese Taipei.
Sure.
It was also the worst deck played of a reasonable percent at Europe, because I was staying with a Greasefang player and I was having the time of my life. I think he went something like 3-4, and he was above average for the Greasefang record.
So do you think that was just people were really prepared for it, or some bad matchups were heavily played? What do you think the story was there?
I think there's a little bit of a mixture. I think Greasefang is really bad against the Fiery Impulse decks, because that is the best spell to kill a Greasefang with. And I think they were, Creativity was a very popular deck for a bunch of the regional championship season. Greasefang really suffered from the rise of Blue-White Spirits. That's a really bad matchup for Greasefang. But also, Greasefang's best and worst matchups are really based on how well it draws. There are times where if all 4 Greasefangs are in the bottom 15 cards of your library, you won't beat a paper you won't beat a paper bag. So it's not a consistent deck, and people did mitigate that by playing Traverse the Overworld. The lists I've seen started cutting that. I don't know. I think it's probably a bad meta game for Greasefang was the reason in regional championships, but I think it's one of those decks that its power level is quite set now. It's not going to get many new additions when new sets come out. We aren't going to get vehicles to rival Parhelion in terms of power, and a Seeker's Chariot as a backup vehicle is castable, so you kind of can't cut that one. We're probably not going to see a card that does the same thing as Greasefang, so it gets some redundancy in its deck building. So it's always going to be a slightly inconsistent Blast Hammer deck. But in the right metagame, yeah, it will do really well. But I kind of struggle to see a metagame where people aren't playing Fiery Impulse or Blue-White Spirit or Mono-Green Devotion in pretty high numbers.
Sure. I mean, I think you do have tools in those matchups. Like, I agree creativity is very tough. Yeah, playing that matchup from a creativity side has always felt great. But yeah, I like that. I think it has a legitimately quite strong Rakdos matchup. I think it's really good against Lotus Field. Actually pretty good against the aggro decks as well, just because you're quite quick.
It did do well in one of the latter events, which I think was Japan. I think it was either the first place in the Swiss or the winner was a Greasefang deck. But when you look at the list, it was playing a Shieldred main deck, a Gurmag Angler main deck. It was less of an all-in Greasefang deck. And I think that's almost where we'll start to see Greasefang go to in the future. I mean, we're talking about Abzan Greasefang. There have been other builds of Greasefang, not that have had massive success, but an Esper Greasefang deck that's a Rafine style deck has been floating around for a bit.
Yeah, there's also a Mardu version playing Fable of a Mirrorbreaker.
I think the Mardu version is largely just worse than the Abzan version because of the Seeker's Chariot.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
And the list I'm looking at from the Japanese RC did cut Traverse, but Traverse is one of the ways you can make the deck more consistent if you're not worried about graveyard hate. But yeah, it's always going to be a metagame call. It's one of those decks where if you don't respect it and no one else in the room respects it, it might have a good tournament. It's just got its bad matchups. I think are just a bit spread for it to ever be as dominant as it was at one stage. I mean, I think certainly before this regional championship season, Abzan Greasefang was one of the best decks in the format, and it's fallen quite quickly.
No, it makes sense. Yeah. From everything you've said, I think the glass cannon really does sum it up. Like, if you don't get there with Greasefang, because I don't really see any other ways there's no other ways of cheating it in. I'm assuming you're not casting them. Is it just beat down with a Gurmag Angler? Is that your best backup plan?
So yeah, I mean, and most decks don't play the Gurmag Angler, so usually it's your backup plan is casting in a Seeker's Chariot. And yeah, that can be good. I mean, Rakdos is not good against an Seeker's Chariot. But Rakdos starts to adapt with things like Coligan's Command or main deck of Braids. So all of a sudden, that matchup isn't as good to you. It'll always be there and thereabouts. But I think the point that it's very unlikely to get better in many new sets because it needs to be either a vehicle set or some way that we get a functional Greasefang printed.
Yeah, a way of reanimating an artifact. But if that starts existing, there's probably going to be other bigger things.
Well, Bolos of Citadel will be top of my list.
Yes. No, exactly. And actually, I guess the fact we've been through an artifact set, we've been through Brothers War, and I don't really see anything to kind of help with the combo-y side of it from that in this list.
I doubt it's going to get much from Wilds of Eldraine, for example. I don't think the fairy tales are going to really help pick up a Parhelion out of the graveyard.
That's some people's fairy tale.
Right. Well, back to you again, James, because I know you've had some reps with this deck. Do you want to talk us about Indomitable Creativity and its various options that are available to you in Pioneer?
I would love to, yeah. So Indomitable Creativity is a blue-red based sort of combo control deck. You're obviously trying to maximize Indomitable Creativity, so you have very few creatures in your deck. They're all very high impact. You target a token or whatever with your Indomitable Creativity and hit something really big. The choice of what really big thing you're going to hit kind of can lead you down several different routes with this deck about how you want to build it. So, for example, Duke won Pro Tour with a deck trying to hit Worldspine Worm with the God, which doubles its power and gives it haste, attacking with a 30/30 trample haste, confirmed good. You can also Indomitable Creativity into Atraxa. It's just a very generically good value creature which can take over a game. Or you can Indomitable Creativity into Torrential Gearhulk, which we'll come back to later. So the Worldspine Worm version is obviously the one that just wins on the spot, which is really strong, but it has a massive downside that your creativities don't do anything until you cast them for 2. Creativitying for 1, half the time you're just going to hit the God that doesn't do anything. Whereas the other 2 are creativitying for 1 is still good, and it also just has uncastable cards in its deck, which is never a good thing. The Atraxa version, I guess, is kind of a middle ground. You do get to creativity for 1. You have a very high impact hit, but obviously you're still including uncastable cards in your deck. I must say the issue I found with both of these decks is that whilst you can play good value, you can play good sort of cheap interaction and some card draw, but basically your only way to get ahead is casting Indomitable Creativity. Like Fable can get you so far, but you're not copying that much with it, so it doesn't really close out the game. So I find the issue I have with those 2 builds is that you end up just having to jam your creativity into interaction, and it's hard to do that with counterspells up to protect it. So you tend to end up just having to hope they don't have it, and a lot of the time they do. So the version I like a bit more at the moment is trying to hit Torrential Gearhulk off Indomitable Creativity. Generally, you're doing this by discarding a Magma Opus to make a treasure, or obviously getting treasures off your fables and whatnot. And then you obviously get to flashback Magma Opus, which is a really powerful 8-mana sorcery, or 8-mana instant, sorry. I think the really big upside of this deck is you don't need to cast your creativity to win, because Gearhulk flashing back Magma Opus is very good, and Gearhulk's very castable. You can cast the Gearhulk early using the treasure you get. And Gearhulk having flash means that you can play a much better sort of draw-go game. You can leave up all your mana if they play into your counter. If you need to counter something, then you can play your counters, or if not, you just play your Gearhulk end of turn. And you can really be a lot more selective in the spots where you go for your creativity line. I will say I think it's maybe less well positioned than it has been at some points in the past. I was playing a lot of this deck maybe just over a year ago, just before Shieldred got printed, and I felt like it was in a really good spot then. Shieldred's a massive issue for the Gearhulk version, because that deck draws a lot of cards. Opus draws 2 cards, Fable draws cards, a lot of you play some cantrips. It's a really big problem, and the fact that it's 5 toughness means your Opus doesn't kill it, and frankly none of the good red removal really kills it. You end up having to play Divide by 0 to bounce it and get some value, which is fine, but and is very good in other matchups. It's good against mono green, but it is very much a concession to that card, I think, in a lot of ways. I think the deck has some good matchups. I think if you build it with a Divide by 0s, I really like the mono green matchup. I've always liked the Greasefang matchup. The mono white matchup I think is very good. But yeah, you can also Rakdos is still, I think, a bit unfavorable, and you can certainly run into some issues playing against Lotus Field and the like. I think it's probably not in as good a spot as it's been in the past. Out of the 3 versions, I still like the Gearhulk version best, but maybe that's just because I'm too attached. I don't know. The Spirits decks are also kind of a bit tough, to be fair.
I can confirm James is very attached to his Gearhulks. it took a lot of testing, a lot of beating him to beat him off of the Gearhulk Creativity deck for Regional Championship Sophia. But I think my issue with these decks, unless they're with the Gearhulk version, but the Worm version, the Attractor version, both have a lot of setup cards in their deck. And you almost play, you're a bit combo, a bit control, but you don't want to play, you wouldn't play big score in a control deck.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's a massive weakness, specifically the Attractor version. When you put setup cards into your deck and your path is a card that draws cards, you draw a lot of setup cards that aren't good once you have the Attractor in play. The Gale version is better, but again, it plays some cards that are subpar on their own, and it's not really where you want to be. In terms of how it's done over recently, it was one of the most popular decks at the start of the season, and it's really tailed off to the stage where it's not really popular at all at the end of the regional championship season.
Yeah, find it hard to disagree with loads of that. I think it is a deck where you can build it in a lot of ways. I think you can build it to Bleach Shieldred. I think I've not minded 1 to 2 creative outbursts in the Gearhulk version because it gets you the treasure to get to your Gearhulk or creativity off of, and cleanly kills a Shieldred and gets you enough value. Obviously, it's less good than Opus, but it's I've not hated that.
I had to goldfish that card.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
I thought you'd got the name wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a cool deck. It has a lot of play to it, but yeah, it's probably not in the best spot right now in the metagame.
Nice. All right. So from one is it deck or is it adjacent deck to another one? Alex, do you want to talk us about Blue-Red Phoenix or Blue-Red Drakes? I think they share a bit of the same kind of like DNA.
Yeah, so Blue-Red Phoenix is very reminiscent of the deck that ruled the roost in Modern for so long. The idea is you play Arclight Phoenix, you put it into your graveyard by either cantrips or, in particular in this deck, pieces of the puzzle. And then you use a lot of cheap spells to bring back your Phoenixes. Fueling your graveyard means you get to use the Delve cards as payoff. In particular, Temporal Treasure Cruise. So, functionally Ancestral Recall in this deck. And then the other card it tends to play is Temporal Trespass, which is a Time Walk. So we're playing some real vintage Magic here with Ancestral Recall and Time Walk.
Those are some strong words there, Alex.
Specifically, the Phoenix deck tries to copy Temporal Trespass with Galvanic Iteration. And you get to see some truly filthy games where, the Phoenix player will start with nothing on the board and will bring back 4 Phoenixes, take 2 turns and win. It sounds wild, but it's not an uncommon scenario. The Drake's deck is very similar to Phoenix, but cuts a lot of the more graveyard-centric elements. It's almost like what Phoenix tries to be post-board. Instead of playing Phoenix, it will play Crackling Drake, which is a blue, red, X4, where X is a number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard and exile zone. It's fairly common for a Drake to be 10 power or more. And historically, Phoenix would play Drakes in their sideboard to deal with cards like Rest in Peace, where obviously you're not bringing back your Phoenixes through a Rest in Peace, but the Drake kind of sits there, laughs, and goes, I'm just going to fly over and kill you anyway. Yeah, Phoenix was, I think, in Sophia, so it's like 9 months ago or something. Time is a construct I can't get my head around most of the time. It was the 2nd or 3rd most played deck. It has a really rough Rakdos Midrange matchup, particularly if they're ready for it. For decks that have such a bad matchup against a card like Go Blank is kind of terrifying, because Mind Rot is not a card you would play in most constructed decks, but Go Blank makes Phoenix look awful. Good matchups tend to be anything where Fiery Impulse is good, so things like Greasefang. And you can play a little bit of Permission. The Drake deck, for example, that's floated around tends to play 4 main deck spell pierce. So anything where you can leverage sort of the soft counter spells, things like Blue-Red Creativity are pretty good for the Drake's matchup. Again, it's one of those meta call decks. There are some people out there who are very in tune with the pigeons and will play Blue-Red Phoenix in any Pioneer tournament. I think there were some people who did quite well with it at Athens, for example. But it's definitely not a deck that you're going to pick up and do well with. You need to really be in tune with it. I think the Drake's deck is a fair bit easier to play. That's probably why I've played a lot more of the Drake's deck than I have the Phoenix deck. But again, the Drake's deck I think the Drake's deck has a structural issue. It mulligans a lot. It doesn't mulligan very well. But it does have some good matchups. And, every so often you get to copy a Crackling Drake that's like 20 power and just kill your opponent the turn you play it, which is always nice. Or you play, because both decks play MDFCs, so if you're like me and want to make your life easier, you play the Fling MDFC, and you throw a 20 power Drake at your opponent.
Oh, I don't even have to attack. Love it.
I'm a simple man.
No. Quick question. I'm not sure if this kind of like. I'm assuming this is me not keeping up with the meta, but how come a card like Demi-Lich, the quad blue one from Adventures in the Forgotten Realm, that kind of does a similar thing to Phoenix? It's like cost is reduced for each instant and sorcery spell you cast this turn. So in theory, it could be a 3/4/3. How come that is that just not good enough? Is that just too many hoops to jump through, or?
So there was one absolute hero who top 8'd the regional championship in Athens with a Phoenix deck consisting of 4 Arclight Phoenix, 4 Demi-Lich.
Okay.
I haven't seen anyone else achieve it, like half of that success with the Demi-Lich build.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I think it's largely because Demi-Lich doesn't. It's not good in matchups where you're bad, right? So it amplifies your strength and does nothing to reinforce your weaknesses. Whereas if your creature base is Ledger Shredder or Thing in the Ice, you at least have more play in the other matchups.
Yeah, that's fair. Ledger Shredder is just good card, and Thing in the Ice will block for days until it resets the board.
Well, so Thing in the Ice is generally the best card you can have against mono green in these decks. So yeah, I mean, even I did a lot of testing Phoenix versus Convoke prior to Athens, and obviously Thing in the Ice is quite good against decks that try to attack on the ground, and it bounces everything, and there's a 7/8, and it's quite hard to beat it when it's a 7/8.
All right, let's get into some multicolor shenanigans now. Alex, do you want to talk us about some multicolor piles with like things like Enigmatic Fires and like cards with like Bring to Light, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we've grouped what I refer to as 5 color soup together as a single pile. In reality, none of them are particularly high metagame players in tournaments, but they are quite distinct decks. So first of all, you have what I would think of more as traditional Enigmatic Fires, which will have Yorion as a companion. And the idea is you are a 5-color deck that tries to get the card Enigmatic Incarnation into play, so you can sacrifice an enchantment, tutor up a creature, put it onto the battlefield. This game plan works particularly well with Fires of Invention, which gives you a massive mana advantage. And you basically build to that. You're a 5-color deck which lets you play a host of creatures, so you can incidentally cast them. But I think the biggest payoff is probably Leyline Binding. The dream draw from an Enigmatic Fires deck is to play Leyline Binding on turn 3, play an Enigmatic Incarnation on turn 4, sacrifice the Leyline Binding, go and get your choice of 7-drop, which will probably be something along the lines of Atraxa, Dragonlord Atarka, Agent of Treachery is sometimes floated. Something big that makes a big impact on the board. It makes it hard to lose the game if you can do that on turn 4. Obviously, being a 5-color Yorion deck, consistency is not always going to happen. you play cards that mitigate it. You play things like there's a 2-mana enchantment that lets you land any land type. Nalia's Presence.
Yep.
Yeah.
Comes in, draws a card. We like that.
That's a cantrip that fixes your mana. And you have a good amount of relatively cheap interaction to stave off the early turn so that you get to do your gameplay. On a similar to this version, you get the Keruga Fires version. Obviously, you swap your companion from Yorion to Keruga, which means you're now playing a 60-card deck, but you can't play anything that costs 1 or 2 mana, which is a big drawback. You have to you have to lean on cards which kind of cheat the mana requirement. So something like Stomp, where you can play it as a 2-drop, but technically it's a 3-drop. As a result, you play more of a controlling style in the Keruga Fires deck. You have to play what I would think of as catch-up cards. It will be fairly common to see a Keruga Fires deck run 4 copy of Temporary Lockdown, for example. You still have the Enigmatic, go and fetch a big thing, or just tutor up value creatures. But on top of all of that, you have Keruga as just a one-off card advantage engine. Yorion is a value engine, Keruga is a card advantage engine. It's funny that you can actually play Yorion in the Keruga version and Keruga in the Yorion version as well. You can tutor them up and do exactly the same thing.
It's worth the Fires of Invention in particular makes it feel like you're playing with unnerfed companions, which is really nice. Because if you have your Fires of Invention in play, you play your 3 mana to get your companion, but you're not going to use that 3 mana anyway because you have Fires of Invention in play, you can play it right away. And that's very nice. I think the Keruga deck leans on a companion in a way that no other deck in Pioneer does. But a lot of other decks play a companion because it's free or close to free. But the Keruga deck is quite about Keruga, I think, right? Yeah,
and the aim of all these decks in terms of what matchup you're gunning for Rakdos quite hard. Rakdos is your best matchup. You play a bunch of cards and get a bunch of value that they just can't really interact with in a meaningful way. Your bad matchups, you're awful against Lotus Field, bar some scenarios where you might have Archon of Emeria that can be very helpful. But Lotus Field is a bad matchup. Aggro tends to be pretty bad.
I said, don't see how you'd ever beat a Spirit stack. I think you can scoop the Mausoleum Wanderer, right?
I think the Enigmatic Fires deck have the most polarizing matchups in the metagame, pretty much. And then on a similar basis, but playing slightly fairer Magic, possibly less fair Magic, depending on how you judge it, is the 5-color Bring to Light decks that really have existed from the start of Pioneer. They were very popular at the first Players Tours. I know in the European Players Tours, people like Paolo Vita Dama Rosa were playing Niv-to-Light as it was then. The idea of Bring to Lighting for Niv Mizzet Reborn to go and pick up a bunch of multicolor cards. This one plays a lot more like a control deck. It can 1-for-1. Obviously, Niv Mizzet is a card advantage engine. I think one of the things these decks lean on a lot more now, though, to the extent where some of them have actually cut Niv Mizzet, because Omnath is now a card you can bring to light and is arguably better. It's cheaper. It's more castable. But the Bring to Light Tybalt Cosmic Imposter interaction is largely where these decks get a lot of their power. You cast Bring to Light for 2 or more colors, obviously the whole 5 mana, but you need to make sure you pay 2 colors. You technically go and search up Valky, God of Lies, which is a 1 and a black for a legendary creature god. It's a 2/1. It has an ability that exiles a creature card from your opponent's hand that in most matchups is entirely irrelevant. You're not going to put Valky into play. But because of the way the interaction works, you can cast the 7 mana back half of Valky, which is the Tybalt Planeswalker, off your Bring to Light. So you effectively cheat out a Tybalt for 5 mana. Tybalt is one of the most powerful Planeswalkers in the format. It's so much card advantage, exiles an artifact or a creature, so gets around indestructible quite nicely. If your opponent resolves Tybalt, it's very difficult to beat them. But again, it struggles with all the same matchups, right? It's a multicolor control deck that can have mana issues in that it draws the wrong lands, it cannot draw enough lands, it can get taxed by Thalia, it can get the wrong spell counterspelled. It can even be quite weak against Thoughtseize because it's it's quite easy to pick a hole in a hand for the Bring to Light deck.
If you get rid of like the Leyline Binding or something like that, they can't do the jump up in mana.
Yeah, or even if you keep a hand, you multi-stick, you might keep a hand that casts a Bring to Light on turn 4. But if you Thoughtseize Bring to Light, you've Thoughtseized all the relevant cards out of their hand and their deck. Honestly, I'm not really sure what this deck's supposed to be good against anymore, but it still pops up every so often.
It looks fun, I think, is the main thing. Like I remember when Enigmatic Incarnation got spoiled, or no, sorry, when Leyline Binding got spoiled and people started piecing this together, it sounds like a lot of fun. But I think this is one that I've heard people play in in the version on Arena. I think it might be a bit there.
I think, assuming Bring to Light is on Arena, I think the Niv-to-Light deck will definitely be something you can do. I actually think one of the most appealing things about Niv-to-Light is it is a deck that gets the main deck Slaughter Games. And there will be matchups where you can cast the Slaughter Games on turn 3. These decks play Mana Ramp, which is why we were going to talk about playing their spells sort of one turn ahead of curve. But if you can cast the Slaughter Games on turn 3, if you exile Greasefangs or say the Lotus Field opponent hasn't got a Lotus Field into play yet, exile any of those cards, those decks will struggle to win. But yeah, I think it's a bit more a relic of the past, the Bring to Light deck, than actually something considering the current Pioneer.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of one of these ones that it is taking advantage of kind of like a couple of cool and niche interactions, like especially bringing to light the flip side of Valky. It doesn't mean that like they might not print something like that in the future. Kind of like that kind of flip style Planeswalker is stuff we've seen before in the past. Like it's them is this different to like Jace, that kind of like the Jace, that kind of stuff? Like it is because you're casting the backside, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to be able to cast the backside. So Bring to Light puts the card into exile and then because you can cast either side of it. That's how the interaction works.
Yeah.
For example, Jace Bryn's Prodigy, you can only cast the front side.
Yeah, because only that side has a mana cost.
Yeah.
Cool, makes sense. All right, lovely. All right, I'm assuming this next one might be a little bit simpler because it looks like it's turning some rad sideways. James, do you want to talk about Gruul Vehicles?
Yeah, for sure. So Gruul Vehicles is a Gruul beatdown deck and plays 4 Elvish Mystic, 4 Llanowar Elves, which you mulligan to very aggressively. A large part of your game plan here is you're going to play a very large 3-mana creature on the second turn of the game off your elf, and then continue to cast these really high impact threats like Seeker's Chariot, Sky Sovereign, the Vehicles Angle. You also have a Crone Wars to take other people's high value creatures and get through board stalls. It's a deck where I think it has a very, very good Rakdos matchup because your cards are just your threats are all very high impact. They're hard for them to one for one with. Rakdos really struggles with both Seeker's Chariot and Sky Sovereign. You're pretty into mulliganing to your elves, but if they do kill your elf, it's not a complete disaster. Like it will slow you down a turn. You play almost no 2-drops, so you're basically, if they kill your elf, you're like, cool, pass. But it can very much still win in the late game because your cards are all pretty high impact. And things like Bone Crusher Giant, Lovestruck Beast, 3-mana 5/5, Reckless Stormseeker makes all your subsequent creatures into big hasty threats. Voltaren Thrillseeker, really nice because you just have so many stats. That was one it got from a recent set. It's one of those decks where like you get in some damage early and then there's so many games where it kind of feels like, oh, I've lost, they've stabilized, there's not much I can do, and then you draw a card and like, oh, okay, oops, I win, because when you do get a creature through, your creatures are so big that you're dealing a lot of damage very quickly. I think it's a metagame call. If you really want to beat up on Rakdos, I think this is a pretty good way to do it. And it's also quite good against a lot of the aggressive decks because, they just struggle to deal with 3-mana 5/5s a lot of the time. Having said that, it's really pretty bad against the blue-red decks. Like, you can never beat Creativity, really. Phoenix is a really poor matchup. But those decks are kind of on the downswing, so I could see this being a not terrible time to play Gruul. I think the Convoke deck's probably also a really bad matchup, but I guess that's still relatively niche. Not maybe the most powerful deck in the format, but I think in the right metagame, it's a decent call, and I think I wouldn't hate registering this right now. I'll say that.
I think Gruul's always got the problem that it's built in such a way that you need an elf.
And you do mulligan a lot, but you can very much win on 5,
But any deck that can kill the elf on turn 1, and that includes Rakdos, which is the deck Gruul really goes after. Any deck that can kill the elf on turn 1 buys itself a turn. And if Gruul's entire plan is to be aggressive, that buying that early turn just by killing an elf is massive.
It certainly can be. But against Rakdos specifically, I think often you kind of don't care that much when they kill your elf. Obviously you much prefer if they didn't, but you can just go to the late game and be like, well, my cards are actually more high impact than your cards. They can really struggle to grind through you and execute their game plan. And the Crone Wall kind of solves the Shieldred problem in quite a nice way.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is that a common card for these kind of decks? Is that one you see all the time? But like you are aiming to try and steal their best creature, steal their Drake, steal their Shieldred, and then either beat them in the face with it or fling it, I'm assuming, with the Voldaren Thrillseeker, preferably.
The deck originally was Gruul Boats, and that was a cool deck. And then some people had the ignominy,
the audacity
to cut the boats. Stop the boats.
Do not stop the boats.
The one I'm looking at still has 2 Sky Sovereigns in it. That's some boats.
Yeah, the Crone Wars started off as a sideboard card for mono green because you could really struggle against their Cavaliers because they actually can block a lot of your creatures. But kind of everyone was like, oh, what if we play 1 main deck? Oh, it's really good against this Shieldred card. Oh, what if we play 2 deck? Okay, we'll just put them all in the main deck. They're fantastic.
Okay, nice. No, sweet. It does look fun. I do love turning red and green cards sideways. Just a quick question, because this is kind of me. Why no Questing Beast and why no Rampaging Raptor? Is it just 4 is too much for this kind of format? Is it a bit too slow, or?
Yeah, you can only play so many 4s. A Seeker's Chariot is... Because those cards, while they do hit for a lot of damage, they also do just die to 1 spot removal spell. Whereas all the 4s you want to play tend to be... They can't be cleanly dealt with by 1 card. You steal their creature, they're pretty sad about killing it. A Seeker's Chariot just gives you a lot of value.
And when you have Reckless Stormseeker in your deck, cards with haste aren't as valuable, right? Because you are going to give other cards haste.
Yeah, for sure. And the Seeker's Chariot specifically is kind of the nuts with Stormseeker because you get to attack it, crew it, attack right away, make another token that turn. Gets a lot of work done.
No, sweet. Makes sense. Looks cool. Right. Alex, do you want to take it away with one of the newer cards? I think this kind of blew up the internet a little bit when it came out. Do you want to talk about Metamorphic Alteration combo? A little bit of a new one that has popped up.
Yeah, so this deck is built entirely around the synergy between Archfiend of the Dross, which is a 4-mana 6/6 flyer, which I'm sure when you listen to that, you think it can't have any downsides whatsoever.
No, none at all. It's 2023. There will be no downsides.
Well, it has the upside. It enters with 4 oil counters on it, which is it means you get to put some dice on your creatures. That's always a nice feeling. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove an oil counter. That's slightly annoying. It's some admin. And then the unfortunate line of text that if it has no oil counters on it, you do lose the game.
On your upkeep.
On your upkeep, which is, well, actually, yeah, on your upkeep. It's just, less good. Now, the last line of text on the card I think is massively overlooked, actually. But whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, they lose 2 life. Which I think is actually one of the big redeeming parts of that individual card. But the way that works with Metamorphic Alteration, which I mentioned previously as an unplayable draft rare out of M19, Metamorphic Alteration is a 1 and a blue for an aura. You enchant a creature, you don't target, you enchant a creature, and it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature, and the enchanted creature is a copy of the chosen creature. If you make your opponent's creature a copy of Archfiend of the Dross, it doesn't enter the battlefield with 4 oil counters, it enters with 0, therefore they will lose on their upkeep. So to stop this combo happening, they have to kill their copy of Archfiend of the Dross on your turn, because the moment it goes to their upkeep, they will just die. As you can see, it's a Splinter Twin situation. It's a 2-card combo that just wins the game.
Has any phrase been more overused than this is Splinter Twin?
It involves a creature and an enchantment, I guess. But yeah.
But it came to light out of the US Regional Championship, CFT stock, who is the brain behind Ratabarik combo, however you pronounce Ratablade, whatever it's called. But yes, no one saw this one coming. That is for sure. There has been a lot of discourse about exactly how to build this deck. A common way to do it is effectively to take the red-black mid-range deck and add some blue cards. You have to be blue-black for Archfiend of the Dross and the Metamorphic Alteration. So that will still see you play things like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Thoughtseize, Bloodtithe Harvester. You're playing good cards. Funny enough, you cut the Shieldred to put the Archfiend of the Dross in, which sounds wild.
It's a budget include, to be fair.
But yeah, you basically play red-black with this combo in. Has the benefit of being a good deck with a combo in it rather than a bad deck with a combo in it. But your Grixis and the mana base is very awkward. A lot of people have tried to play Dig Through Time in this deck. And yeah, double blue on a deck that wants to play Bloodtithe Harvester on turn 2 is difficult. And I think people have started to cut that, which I think is a shame, but it does bring the argument of which is the more powerful card, Fable of the Mirror Breaker or Dig Through Time. And me and James don't have enough time this evening to finish that argument. But the way I have personally played this deck, and I've toyed around with it quite a bit, is just to play straight blue-black. The benefit of that is you get to play less lands. You get to play things like Consider and Opt. You still play good cards in things like Ledger Shredder is a very good creature. You can play a nice interactive game plan with Thoughtseize, spot removal, things like Drown in the Lock. And then you get to play the full 4 Dig Through Times, which makes you much better as a combo deck, but obviously worse as the slightly mid-range backup plan. In terms of how strong the deck is, I think we've not seen the best version of this deck yet. For the reason that I outlined, that Grixis having 3 colours and also playing 25 lands, no cantrips, is very awkward. Whereas blue-black missing out on cards like Bloodtithe Harvester and Fable of the Mirror Breaker means it's less powerful but more consistent. Archfiend of the Dross in itself is a playable Magic card. It does win the game, right? The thing about 4 oil counters is it means it gets to hit your opponent for 18, which means 1 spot removal spell usually kills them. So it's not like you're playing 2 bad cards in your combo. You're playing 1 serviceable beta that actually, when you resolve it, people are quite afraid of it because the 6/6 flyer hits hard. The only bad card you're playing is Metamorphic Alteration, which is trash when you don't have Archfiend of the Dross, let's be honest.
And just trash when they don't have creatures.
Well, if you play Swan Song in your deck, it's very easy to give them.
You can play.
We're doing Swan Song. Okay.
we're main decking Swan Song in 2023.
Getting back some bad cards.
Yeah, I think this is a deck that has a lot of potential. When I played it, I found it's surprisingly one of its good matchups was mono green. Not because you're a combo deck, but Archfiend of the Dross is just bigger than everything mono green has to offer.
Yeah, attacking through Cavalier is a really big game.
Yeah, and I think that's why this deck, for example, over red-black, which has a much worse mono-green matchup, it's kind of why it's exciting. I think it's probably 1 or 2 cards away from being competitive, but I think the more people work on this deck, the better it'll be, and I'm excited to see where it gets to.
Yeah, definitely, and I could definitely see a world where just like we're 2 to 3 years further down the line, they just printed more good blue and black spells, and it just ends up being a blue-black deck, and you don't need the red cards as much, and then the mana base is kind of solved.
Yeah, I actually think so. I tried to build this deck. I know we joked about Splinterstone, but I looked at how Splinterstone was built in Modern at around Pro Tour Fate Reforged. I think that's the one it won. And something like Vendilion Click would go a long way in this deck, right? Where you are a deck with a game plan, and you can just beat them down. You can play Brazen Borrower, but I think Vendilion Click interaction is more meaningful. So you're kind of looking for cards in the blue-black shell that make its backup game plan better, and I think that's when the deck will get exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I played one league with the blue-black version of this. It's a lot of fun.
How many times did you lose your own Archfiend?
I never lost my own Archfiend. I definitely won a lot more by attacking with Archfiend than with the Metamorphic combo. Although I did enjoy, I was playing like 1 Shark Typhoon in my deck, and I did quite enjoy making my opponent's Atraxa into a Shark token with Metamorphic Alteration. That was quite fun.
Right. Cool. Right. We have a couple more left to go through. Alex, did you want to talk about this red-white Exile burn deck?
Yeah. So I think the reason I want to talk about this is very much the newest hot deck in the format. It's a deck built around Pia Consul of Revival out of March of the Machines Aftermath. So Pia is a red and a white for a 2/3. Thopters you control have haste. Whenever you play a land from exile or cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So the idea is you are sort of a mono red-white prowess build with a bunch of the spells that put cards into exile. So, for example, Reckless Impulse and Ren's Resolve, which are functionally the same card, put 2 cards into exile, you play them out of exile, you trigger your Pia. You've got that alongside Monastery Swiftburst, All-Star Mage, some burn spells with Play with Fire and Lightning Strike, Change the Rocks, which is one of the best removal spells in Pioneer that's never really had a home because red-white decks don't. It's difficult to get a deck with enough white sources and enough mountains. And one of the other cards that makes a big difference in the deck is Showdown of the Skulls. You're weirdly like an aggro deck with a lot of card advantage. This deck's been very hot recently. Not sure how powerful it is on its own. It's just had a lot of attention and warrants talking about. It's nice to see an entire deck get built around a card out of Aftermath in Pioneer, because it's not really happened sort of with Elementals, but that's not really stuck around. I do think this deck's a little cute, because actually one of this deck's main things is being a red-white aggro deck, and you're playing a bunch of cards in it that don't go in a red-white aggro deck. You'd play Light Up the Stage, but you probably wouldn't play 11 card advantage spells in your general red aggro decks. I think it's worth talking about. It's cool. It's pretty fun to play. It's pretty cheap as well, and it gives you all the tools for an aggressive deck, if that's where you want to look at in the format.
No, fantastic. Yeah. And another also fairly cheap deck, like apart from like the Sacred Foundries, this is super budget. So we do love that. All right. Thank you both. It's fantastic to see like a very diverse format. Like we've gone through a fair few decks and they all seem to be doing different things, like in a very cool and interesting way. Just quickly before we kind of wrap up the deck portion of this, James, are there kind of any other decks or any kind of cards that you've seen that have been doing some interesting things recently?
So I think, there's definitely some other really powerful stuff going on. I think like the Rona combo engines are definitely interesting. You can repeatedly untap your Rona, make some infinite mana through Mox Ambers. I think those are definitely the ones that I would like consider playing in a tournament now, but it wouldn't shock me. There's a bunch more things that it wouldn't shock me if someone broke, and it suddenly became a tier 2 deck. But I think the ones we haven't talked about I mostly like wouldn't consider as like great things to play in tournaments right now.
No, makes sense. On the topic of tournaments, hand on heart, if you were both playing in a tournament tomorrow, I mean, we're getting close to the weekend, there's a chance you both might be playing in a tournament this weekend. What would you play? Alex, if I throw this to you first.
Mine's really easy because I've got Boros Convoke sleeved on my desk, ready to go to an RC2 next weekend. So.
Solid. Nice. Okay. Very cool. James, what about yourself?
So I really want to play Untitled Creativity. I think in reality, if I really cared about the result, so I'd definitely be narrowing myself down to decks I have a decent amount of reps with. I think Pioneer is very much in a spot where there's lots of decks that are pretty good, and you're better off playing, rather than chasing the perfectly best positioned deck, you're better off playing a deck that you're really confident in your ability to play well. I actually think Gruul Vehicle's in a pretty decent spot. I think that might be what I'd submit right now. But I could certainly see myself regretting that choice almost immediately.
Yeah, I think James said something very important. I actually think Pioneer is in the stage where Modern used to be, where familiarity and knowing your deck very well, knowing the matchups very well, is a lot more important than chasing 1 or 2% by changing your deck very short term. I think in my mind, 2 of the best players in the UK just consistently played Blue Red Phoenix and Enigmatic Fires, and nowhere would I even consider playing them from a power level point of view. But they know their way around the deck so well that they get more percentage from playing those decks than they do from flipping to the so-called best deck at any given weekend. I think Pioneer is a format where familiarity and practice are what you want.
Yeah, 100%. I think if you're getting into a format, it's much better to pick a deck you like the look of and really put some reps in with it, rather than being like, oh, that matchup seems really bad, maybe I'll try this other thing to metagame, or that deck's a bit more popular this weekend. I think knowing your deck, getting those reps in is really important.
And or by all means, tune your deck for an expected metagame. But I think you're better off playing the deck you have experience with and know your way around.
Right, awesome. So I think that covers a lot of the decks. Let's just quickly touch on some of the cards, because we've got like 10 years worth of cards now. There's one of the things that I'm liking from the sound of Pioneer is that there is still room to brew. There's still room to find cool interactions with some powerful cards. So I think we're just going to go around and talk about some cards that we think maybe could see a splash. Maybe they need a bit more support to kind of make work. I'm a little bit gutted that one of the decks that I really liked from when I was playing Modern hasn't transferred into Pioneer yet, and that's Golgari Elves. I really liked this in Modern. It was like it was a collected company deck. I liked the Golgari version because I play Golgari and everything, but like you play, there seems to be enough elves in the format. Like there's Elvish Mystic, we have Lanor Elves, that kind of stuff. I'm assuming the big ones we're missing are just some of the good lords, like Elvish Archdruid is probably a bit of a big miss. But I mean, there is Shaman of the Pack in Pioneer. That's all I really want to be doing. Just like collected company into 2 Shaman of the Packs and you win. that's when I liked Modern. That's when I was well up for it. Like how far away is like Elves, do you think? Because Elves is quite a big, like, people like Elves, basically. It's kind of like Goblins. It's like an entry-level thing that a lot of people like. Like, how far away do you think something like Elves or like the Collected Company style package is from getting up there in the tiers?
So there is an Elves deck. It largely builds itself. It's built around Elvish Warmaster from Kaldheim, which makes a token every time an elf comes into play or something. It's not particularly powerful. It kind of folds a bit to the Rakdos deck because
it's all 1/1s.
Yeah, and it's weirdly weak to just spot removal, right? You don't have the you need a base before you can go off with the Pioneer Elves deck. I think Li Tian, who obviously is a relatively well known Magic professional, did play it at his regional championship, which implies the deck is playable. I think that was very much a metagame call, but it's not far off being playable. I think Pioneer would be a better format for more playable Collected Company decks. I think Collected Company is a great Magic card, and usually the sign of a healthy format. If a deck is playing like 30 creatures in it, that shouldn't necessarily be problematic most of the time. The only decks that really do play it are like Angels. There's a green-white Company deck that's not particularly exciting, and Elves itself. I think it's the creatures we're cocoing into, really, that we need more of. Something like Kitchen Finks would go a long way in Pioneer Collected Company decks. Not that I think we'll see Kitchen Finks, and I really hope we never get like Pioneer Horizons to put Kitchen Finks into Pioneer. But that style of card was a little bit of value, a little bit of recursion. You can't just one-for-one it. That would go a long way.
Yeah, I think the Elves deck specifically, the thing it's kind of missing is something like Azuri, where it can just transform a lot of mana into winning the game on its own. I mean, not on its own, you need a lot of other elves, obviously, but like Shaman of the Pack, generally you need like 2 or 3 of them. Whereas Azuri, just getting that big overrun, kind of just finishes the game if you have that and just a bunch of 1/1 elves. And Pioneer doesn't quite have that. Like, yeah, Shaman's good, but it doesn't do enough on its own, I don't think.
I think Elves probably misses as weird as it sounds, a third Llanowar Elves. Because obviously it plays 4 Llanowar Elves for Elvish Mystic. But it tends to have to make up the numbers on its mana elves with things like Nullroot Trapper.
Yeah, that is not a good card.
Yeah,
there's the Sentinel that has the as a 1/2.
Sentinel, yeah, 1/2 reach.
If you
Blocks
could play
a Mausoleum Wanderer all day.
That's
a curious obsession on
it. But yeah, if you could play 14 Llanowar Elves in Elves, you would. Like you can't keep a hand playing Elves that doesn't have a 1-drop in it. But the quality of your deck drops off quite quickly to the extent where you're playing Nullroot Trapper.
Yeah, none of that. Okay, no, that's fair. But I guess Elves is one of those. It's a popular tribe.
There'll always be new Elves printed into Magic. It's an archetype that I think can only get better.
Let me throw this to you, Alex. Then, yeah, are there any other cards you can think of that you think could make a splash? Maybe they just need a few more prints to kind of, or a few more pieces to kind of tie the room together, as it were.
I think one of the cards that stands out from previous standard decks would be Rally the Ancestors. Rally is a phenomenally powerful card if you've got the right sort of combo shell. I think it probably hasn't taken off in Pioneer for a few things, one of which is there is quite a bit of graveyard hate around. But I think you could deal with that if the payoff was worth it, and we're not quite there. Again, it's kind of like how do you put things in your graveyard? How do you get them out of your graveyard? And I think it probably needs something on both ends of those scales. I was toying with a very bad black-white Convoke deck that was going to rally things out the graveyard to Convoke off of. Shockingly, that never got off the ground.
Not yet. Give it time.
Sounds like a lovely way to throw away some play points. I'm all on board for it.
Oh, I throw away play points playing better decks than that as well.
And then, James, what about yourself? Any cards that stand out to you that you want to break open in Pioneer? Any Brewer's Paradises for yourself?
So I think one of the really powerful cards in Pioneer that it doesn't really see any play at the moment is Bolas the Citadel. it's a lot of mana, but it's such a powerful effect if you can get it going. There was a back in the sort of early-ish days of Pioneer, I guess, there was a deck. There was like a Coco deck with a bunch of elves. It tried to put Boros' Citadel into play with like Woe Strider and Catacomb Sifter, so it could keep scrying a bunch, manipulating the top card of its deck, and kind of just keep going. It was quite bad. We shouldn't bring back that build, but it strikes me that it's a breakable card. You know, it's if we have a better way to cheat it into play or something, there's maybe something that could be done there.
There is still a Jund version of that deck that shows up every so often, and when the stars align and you play your elf on turn 1 and your Feast of Forgotten Gods on turn 2 with another elf, and then all of a sudden you play a Boros' Citadel on turn 3 and you don't see a land on the top of your library for quite a while.
Yeah,
it feels really good. One archetype I would like to add that I would like to see that is a wider archetype, but it's just a lands deck. It might be a Maze's End deck, preferably not, because
Are all the gates legal?
I think there are 11 gates, because there was one Thran Portal is a gate, I think.
Right, okay. Oh, yeah, a lot of the other ones have been commander-only ones recently, haven't they? Ooh, okay.
We do have Golos legal, just saying.
Yeah, we can do 5-color Maze's End, and I say have a fun time, but we might, opponents won't. I think there's something in Slogurk and a lands brew, and I don't know, I've tried to put together a Yorion version, because there's so many bad cards you can cram in to try and make this work. Shockingly, it didn't. And that was just goldfishing it. So.
Well, when you can't win goldfishing, it's you're in a pretty rough spot.
No, like, what do you call it? Gitrog Monster's legal.
Yeah.
That must get you on board a little bit.
Sure is.
The other Gitrog Monster's legal.
I'm down for some Gitrog Monsters. 5 mana is quite a lot, but I'm sure there's something we can do.
I mean, I might have to admit, I was playing Corrupt in this deck as a wing card.
Oh, another glorious home for Arboreal Grazer, I'm sure.
We make Arboreal Grazer the mascot of this podcast.
Yeah.
I can add it to the picture. Yeah, that still stuns me that is a... like, okay, everything good I've said about Pioneer, put it to one side. The fact that Arboreal Grazer is apparently a stonewalled like pillar of the format is alarming, but we'll take it. Right, awesome. Thank you both. I think we're going to end it there. It just leaves me to thank Alex for joining us today. Really appreciate your insight, dude. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
You can find me on Twitter at AW_MTG. You may have the pleasure of no doubt beating me on Modo. My username there is OYU for stupid reasons that teenage Alex thought was smart. Yeah, that's about it for social media.
No, awesome. Yeah. I really appreciate you being on today. And also, James, thank you as well. Always a pleasure, man.
Yeah, always good. Always good chatting Magic.
Fantastic. And it just leaves me to thank you all for listening. Please follow, subscribe, give the podcast a 5-star rating, tell a friend. Whatever the podcast platform of choice that you're using allows you to do, please do it. It greatly helps out. Until next time, it's goodbye from all of us, and we will see you all soon. Goodbye.